Welcome to All Computery Tutorials. The topic this go round is while loops. Having different kind of loops in a programming language is really more of a matter of convenience rather than necessity. There really isn't anything that you can do in one of them that you wouldn't be able to do in another kind of a loop, or either a while loop, for loop, or do while loop. Sometimes it just takes a little bit more monkeying around to get it to happen in the order that you want it to, which is why, as I said, it's more of a matter of convenience than necessity. Let's take a look at the anatomy of a while loop. We've got one on the screen now. And in this case, we are declaring a variable before we get into the loop, which is what we're going to use as our counter. And then in the while loop, we've got our condition, which is I less than 10. And then we've got the code that we want to have run, which is system.out.println and then loop run plus I. And then after that, we're incrementing our counter variable. And if we go ahead and run that, we get the output loop run 0 through loop run 9. If you're having a deja vu feeling, that's because this loop is the exact same as our for loop that we looked at in the last tutorial. And that's because we are doing the exact same idea. We're using just a different format to make it happen. So let's look at a circumstance that a while loop is a little bit better suited to than a for loop. If you'll notice, this while loop is really kind of inconvenient. We've got code in a couple of different places. We have to declare a variable up here. We have to increment it down here. We're testing it here. It would just be easier to reuse a for loop. So let's look at a more specific while loop circumstance. There's a little bit more that's going into this example, and I don't want to get too deep into everything that's happening, so I'll just give a brief overview of the structures we're using. Create list is a method that I wrote that creates a list of names, and I'm putting it into an array list, which is just a structure that can hold, in this case, strings. I'm using generics there. And then an iterator is an object that will give you the ability to go over every item in that list and make sure that you've hit all of them. An iterator has two methods on it that we're going to be using today. One is hasNext, and the other is next. HasNext checks to see if there are more items in the list that you haven't seen yet, and then next gives you the next item in the list that you haven't seen yet. So it's kind of like having a book, and you open it up and you say, does this book have a next page? If it does, you turn the page and you look at the next one. If it does not, then you are done. And our while loop is going to be testing that hasNext method to see if it should keep going. So when this loop goes into, it calls it.hasNext or iterator.hasNext. If that returns true, meaning that there is another item in this list, we print out the next item, and then we continue on, and we get back and we go into our loop again. And if there is another item, so now a second item in the list, it goes in and it prints out that next item in the list over and over again. So now if we run that code, it iterates through and prints out our list of names. So now when next returned John Michael Caine, that meant that hasNext was going to return false because that was the last item in the list. And that meant that our loop is done because hasNext is now false. You could monkey around in a for loop and make this happen. You could shift around the different pieces. You could probably put it in there. It's just significantly more convenient, in my opinion at least, to do this inside of a while loop. Like I said, there's a lot going on here behind the scenes. If you're not familiar with ArrayList or iterator, this might be a little bit confusing, but it is a circumstance that while loops are ideally suited for. As always, this has been a screencast version of a tutorial I've got out on my blog, allcomputery.blogspot.com. Go ahead and take a look. There's some other stuff out there. Might help you be a better programmer. Thank you for watching.